So this is still a test. If any of you have tuned in now, feel free to tune back in 5 minutes. Just making sure everything is working. Which at the moment it seems not to. Oh, fantastic. Okay, we have a 3-minute, sorry, we have a 40-second delay. I should be aware of that. And we are back. Hello, everyone. It's very nice to, I would say, see you. I can't technically see you, so I guess it's just nice to know that you're listening to me. Either way, I'm Martin Devenney. I'm speaking to you from London, and I'm really happy to chat to you for what I hope to be roughly half an hour to 40 minutes about extensions and how to approach debates from the second half. If you have any questions, if I understand this correctly, Ben will be able to provide those over Messenger, and hopefully I will see them, so I'll be able to respond to them as they come in. Bear in mind that there is probably going to be roughly a minute's delay, but that's probably part of the small advantages when you're able to still have workshops all over the world. Hang on, Ben is calling me. And we're back. At least I hope we're back. So this session will have a very simple structure. At least I believe it has a very simple structure. One, what is an extension? You'll hear both judges and people giving workshops talk a lot about extensions as though it is just a very simple concept. I believe that it actually has. Oh, for fuck's sake. Yeah, no, I figured as much. Give me 2 seconds to try to sort this out. Okay, Ben, can you hear me? So Ben, here's the thing. Fantastic. Now I'm back now for the third time. Let's see if we can make this thing work. So, structure of this session is going to be very simple. One, what is an extension? Two, how do you prepare for an extension? What is specific about preparation when you are an extension? And three, when you are in the debate, how do you choose what are the things you prepared to run in extension? And then fourth, how do you win from extension? Let's see if we can also get a moment where the entirety of my head is actually in the picture. So, first of all, what is an extension? So, the extension, which is a material that you bring in any of the closing teams, is effectively material that wins more. I like that idea because someone on your side will already have made a reasonable attempt at winning the debate. So there's already been a fair amount of winning. This is about bringing something that is even more of a winning idea than what already exists. So the question to answer in order to understand how to have an extension is to ask what wins debates. So debates are generally won in one of two ways. Either you prove something that is given to you in the motion. So if the motion is that this house will create a joint military force of former Soviet states to create stability in Central Asia, then the way you prove that is by showing good ideas that are associated with implementing that idea, or you win a debate by beating the other side. So this could be that the benefits of the motion are fairly obvious. It might be that the previous team had already explained what they are, but there has been a very strong objection to one of those to those benefits, and you win the debate by showing that that objection is actually not something that you need to consider. So at the end of the day, the second still leads to you proving the thing in the motion. In terms of the things you did to win the debate, what you've actually just done is beat the only obstacle that stands in the way of implementing the motion. So there's a subtle difference to these two approaches. So you either want to have something that is directly a benefit, or you want to have something that removes benefits or harms from the other side, thus beating them. And this is a really important concept. I am very fond of the story of the two travelers who are somewhere in deep into a rainforest and they hear a vicious predator. And it sounds like a jaguar or some kind of large cat animal that is potentially very dangerous to human beings. And one of the travelers decide to start putting on their runner shoes. The other one looks at them and goes, "Are you crazy? You can't outrun that predator." And he looks back and says, "I mean, I don't need to outrun the predator. I only need to outrun you." Now, that's a very old and a somewhat trivial joke, but the point of it is that you don't necessarily need to beat everything that exists in the debate. You don't necessarily have to be the one that presents the biggest benefit, as long as you are the team that is better than the team that is currently the best. So it can very often be enough to just choose an extension or have an extension that contributes a new idea that is more important or more relevant or better proven than the idea that was the most important or best proven idea before you presented it. So that is the idea of how we look at an extension. It's the addition of material that wins more than anything that has already happened or might later on happen in the debate. So, how do you prepare for something that isn't only good, but needs to be better than what has already been said in a debate that you have not seen at the time you go into the debate? This is a difficult skill, because when you're preparing for opening, it is often very simple. You think about the motion and you prepare a case, and you hope that that case is as solid as possible so that it can prove something to the judge, prove that it would be a good idea to ban all drugs or it would be a bad idea to ban all drugs. Of course, in extension, if you have to win more than previous teams, you can't run exactly the same argument as the previous teams. Because if someone has already presented an argument that is winning a certain amount, and you present the same argument, then you're at best only winning as much as that team, which means that that team is getting the credit for it. You haven't done anything to put yourself forward ahead of another team in the debate. So if you go into preparation as you would do for opening and just prepare a case, and that case is the same as a team in an opening, you might be in trouble. So does that mean that closing teams have a disadvantage because they have the same amount of preparation time, but they have to provide arguments that are distinct? They don't get the first choice. So in terms of preparation, there are different sets of advantages and disadvantages. And this is really important to understand. Because when you are in opening, you tend to need to prepare your arguments in detail. So you might spend the first 5 minutes of preparation or 8 minutes of preparation discussing your arguments, making sure that you know what you're going to argue and that they are good arguments and you've thought of things that the other side might say. Then you probably have to spend 5 minutes or so actually making sure you can present them in a good and clear and logical way. When you are in closing, you get to do that while the opening teams are debating. So you will have an additional half hour to write out all your arguments in detail. So while you are not able to maybe run everything you prepared, so some things in preparation will be a wasted time, you have more time to develop the arguments. What does that mean? That means that you probably have some time in preparation that you can use for other things. So again, you might spend the 5 to 8 minutes discussing the different arguments that exist in the debate, but you don't have to spend the last 5 minutes discussing how exactly they need to be presented. You can trust that you're able to do that as the debate goes on. So in this time, the thing that is really valuable to do in extension is to have a discussion about the relative importance of the arguments you've thought. So what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that instead of just saying this is important because there is a benefit and this benefit is good for people, ask yourself if you're able to say argument A is more important than argument B because of a reason. And then do the same thing the other way around. Argument B is more important than argument A for a different reason. Let's take an example of that. Let's say that we do have the motion about legalizing all drugs. Now, there might be an argument that drugs become safer when you legalize them, because when you legalize them, they are sold in maybe supermarkets, and in supermarkets you have certain quality controls of the product you sell. So maybe drugs are dangerous, but at least you know that they don't contain any other substances than the drug. So maybe all those unfortunate accidents that happen when people take drugs that have dangerous substances will not happen, so we might save lives. But there might also be an argument that it is good to legalize all drugs because right now illegal organizations that cause other harm, they might have protection rackets, they might be involved in international terrorism, are the only ones that sell drugs because they don't care whether they get arrested or not. When you have legal people selling these drugs, then they don't have unique access to the drugs market. So we cut out a lot of profit from organizations that cause harm to people in other ways. Now we have two different arguments. So if I were to prepare this for extension, I might say, well, it is more important to get safer drugs because we can fight terrorism and we can fight organized crime in other ways. This is something that definitely can only be solved by legalizing drugs because it's the only way we can control what goes into them, and a lot of innocent lives will be saved by doing that. Or I might say undermining organized crime is more important than getting safer drugs because at the end of the day, there are quite few instances of people dying because of unsafe drugs. The majority of people who die because of drugs just die because drugs are dangerous in general. So there aren't very many people we help there. We help all of society when we get this organized crime. This organized crime causes all of society to live in fear. So what have I done here? I have created a plan and I've worded arguments that allow us to say that whatever of these we choose, we can give reasons to convince a judge that our argument is the most important. This is really important to do because in our minds, we probably already have opinions. We probably already think that drugs, like fighting organized crime, is really important, or creating safer drugs is really important, or whatever other argument you might think of. You might already have an idea of how they play out in your mind. But you don't get to choose what you're going to run. So because you don't get to choose that, you need to prepare a way in which you can argue that if you, by some metric, by caring about some person, by something that the judge can relate to, there is a reason for why the argument you choose is the most important. So then you can continue doing that. So for all the arguments you have, you keep comparing them to each other and you create reasons for why they are the most important. By doing that, that means that when you then have to choose the argument that you're going to run in the debate, then you can sit there on your own and develop the argument and write out the text and write out how to say it. But both of you are already clear about why it is that you are winning. What idea you're selling to the judges that says, if we prove our argument, it is not only important, it is more important than the argument that has been presented by previous teams. So that is how preparation is different in closing than in opening. So we're done with preparation. We know what an extension is. Now we're in the debate and we have to ask ourselves, how do we choose our extension? Before that, are there any questions? Fantastic. So we're in the debate and we're going to choose our extension. So sometimes this is really easy. Sometimes you just have your favorite argument. You really want to run it. You think it's the most important argument in the debate, and the opening team on your side just didn't choose it. Fantastic. Sometimes it's reasonably easy. You had two arguments, they more or less equally important. Not a biggie. Opening run one argument, you run the other argument. It's pretty simple. There are two situations that are a bit more complicated than that. I'm going to discuss them one at a time. One is when you have a team or when you have an opening team and they run all of your arguments. How do you choose which of the arguments you decide to develop? Which argument do you add things to? And how do you add them? And the second one is, which is similar, what happens when you have 2 or 3 arguments left and all of a sudden you need to choose a couple of them? How do you make that choice? So in both of these cases, you are stuck in a situation where there's no obvious choice. You have different arguments and you have to make a decision. So I want to give you a list to prioritize this. But before I do that, I want to make it really clear why you have to make this choice. So it is very tempting and often quite dangerous in a debate to go, hey, we have 4 arguments left. Let's just run all 4 arguments. I mean, if one of them fails, we have 3 left. Generally, what happens with this is that all of them fail because you don't have the time or the space in one speech to prove 4 different arguments in a way that makes the judges feel that either of those arguments were more important than the ones that happened before. Note that the thing you need to do from extension is to give one reason for your side that is more important than all the rest. And if you do that, giving a second reason doesn't actually improve your chances of winning the debate. You've met your win condition. You've given that one reason. So now the judges go, well, none of the reasons from opening were more important than that one reason. They beat opening. None of the objections from the other side seem to matter as much as this one argument. Therefore, they can't place over either. Therefore, team with a great one idea wins. So this is different from being an opening. An opening, it might be a good idea to have different arguments because you have more time to develop each of them, and you can show the judges how even if one fails, there might be reason to consider the second and the third one. And you don't know what's going to come later on, so therefore you don't know that there might not be something that enters into that area. You also probably need to make sure that you have covered many arguments so you don't leave an argument to closing that is too easy for them to just take and make important. In closing, or in extension, you know exactly what has been said in the debate. The debate is clear to you. You know what the majority of the arguments that happened, so you can choose one thing that is more important than the rest. Do that because you're going to need the time to do all the rebuttal and all the engagement to the existing ideas and to do all the comparisons for why you're more important. So that time will be useful. Make sure that you have it. So assuming now that we need to choose one or perhaps 2 ideas, how do we do this? So I would say that there are 5 things we can use to choose an extension that will make it that will help it win the debate. The 5 things are as follows, and I will discuss them in each in turn. 1, tactics. 2, proximity to the motion. 3, importance of stakeholders. 4, ease of proof. And 5, resonance with intuitions. Those are my titles for them. They probably don't make any sense at this point, but I'm going to discuss them in more detail. So, 1, tactics. This is the most important way of choosing an extension when you are in closing, at least in my opinion. How does this work? So most often, what you want to do is you want to look at the 2 teams in your top half. Let's assume for this discussion that we are in closing government. The first thing I will ask myself is, has it just been a big hole in opening government? And if there's been a big hole in the way that they have argued something, is that important? The way I determine if it is important is if it has been attacked by opening opposition. This is really, really important to consider, because there might be a big mistake in opening government. Maybe opening government is discussing a motion about whether or not Finland should join NATO, and they did not point out that Sweden isn't a member of NATO. That might be a big hole, but if no one cares about it, no one has made an objection to it, going up an extension and going, hey, we're the ones who said that thing that opening government forgot to say, means that you have new things, but doesn't mean that it is more important. So the crucial bit of identifying what extension to run tactically is to look at what opening opposition attacks on. So this is particularly important when the opening team has run all of your arguments and you need to run the same argument in a better way. You need to add something to that argument. We generally call this an analysis extension. So what you want to do is look at the biggest argument for opening opposition and say something like, well, we agree with opening government that Finland needs to join NATO in order to guarantee its border. But opening opposition pointed out that Russia is very unlikely to ever invade Finland. We are going to be the team to show why Russia is likely to both invade Finland if NATO is not there, but secondly, to show why being a member of NATO is something going to stop Russia. So what we're going to add is why joining NATO specifically changes Russia's incentives. So maybe opening government tried the same, but if you're going to add details there, taking the thing that opening opposition had as their strongest objection and saying we're going to choose material that beats that, means you're likely to win that part of the debate. So if the tactics of the room allows you to choose between one piece of material that directly attacks the strongest point in opening opposition and one piece of material that does not, you want to choose the one that directly attacks it in open opposition, and you want to say to the that is your contribution, so you justify why you have similar material, but now you're adding something that is necessary for your side to win the debate. Second is the proximity to the motion. Now this is something that a lot of teams tend to struggle with. So very often in most debates, there will be a range of direct outcomes, especially if it's a debate about a policy. And then there will be indirect outcomes. So for instance, if there is a motion about giving twice as many votes to members of your country's minority, because maybe they aren't represented in that country, then the direct outcome is that whoever they care about is more likely to be elected. The second outcome, probably by proximity, that is if the political parties know that whoever has the minority support will be more likely to be elected, they will probably care more about things that are good for that group. The third level of this is probably if the party that is in, like if the party supported by a minority is more likely to be elected, and that means that political parties probably care more about the issues that affect that minority, then the people in that minority will feel that the political process is good for them and something that cares about them. And you can go on and on and on. So you will note that each of these consequences follow on from a previous consequence, and each of those consequences are further away from the motion. Why is this important to bear in mind? Because the further away something is from the motion, the easier it is to solve it some other way. So if I just want people in the minority to feel empowered and feel that the political process is something that's good for them, maybe we should just have quotas in parliament. Maybe we should just give more power to local government. Maybe we should just make sure that their situation is prioritized in other ways. We can probably find another mechanism to do that. That means that that argument becomes more vulnerable to attacks that say we there is a direct problem with this idea. The direct problem is that you make democracy unfair and your benefits can happen another way. So if you get to choose between two arguments that seem to be equally tactically good, it's closer to the actual motion, then go for that because it's more likely to survive, is more likely to be seen as important. Secondly, thirdly, the importance of the stakeholders. So for any idea or for any argument in a debate, there's going to be someone who is affected. It is either someone who is affected as a consequence, a stakeholder, someone who benefits, or someone who is harmed, or it might be an actor, someone who, as a consequence of this, will do something in a different way. Different actors and different stakeholders might be important to different degrees. So, for instance, if we take the example again about the minorities, it might be that the most important stakeholder in this debate is the minority group. There are other stakeholders. There might, for instance, be the majority population who feel that their vote doesn't matter anymore. Well, then we have to ask ourselves which of these matter the most. And a good way of asking ourselves that is, well, if nothing happens, whose life will go on to be better or worse? And if this happens, will the roles be reversed or will they be more equalized? And very often, even if there is a harm to the majority group, if that harm doesn't bring them to the same level of problem as the other stakeholder already is at, it's very difficult to prove that they are important in the debate. So when you have two different arguments and they're equally close to the motion, ask yourself, what stakeholder can I care the most about? How do I, and if I find that, then I will go for the argument that relates to that stakeholder. Again, there's no point in running both arguments. If you prove to the judge that your stakeholder is the most important, talk about the second stakeholder, which is less important by your own logic, might be interesting, but will not bring you closer to winning the debate. Fourth, ease of proof. Note that this is for when you've already asked the previous three questions and the arguments are equal. So they're equally close to the motion, they make equal tactical sense, and they have stakeholders of equal importance, or they might relate to the same stakeholder. So, ease of proof is about how much work you need to do to prove an argument. This is an important tactical choice that people don't talk very much about, because some ideas are really easy to prove, such as when a group gets more votes, whoever they vote for get into parliament. Fairly easy idea. When a fairly complex idea to prove is that when a group gets a lot of power, or like when a group's votes get a lot of power, that means that later down the line they are less likely to engage in other forms of democracy because they rely more on their vote, so we lose our opinions in the media. Ooh, I mean, that might be a really interesting idea. Maybe someone has written a dissertation on it. Maybe there is an article out there on it. But the complexity that goes into proving that in a debate is high. I might still choose an argument if it is tactically better, if it relates to a more important stakeholder, if it is something that is specifically related to the motion. But if I get to choose the argument that is easier to prove, then I get more time in my speech to talk about why my argument is important and why it beats the other arguments. So if I get that choice, it is important to bear that in mind. And finally, as my fifth way, and it's very rare that I have to consider this as my main way of choosing an argument, this is often something that I consider as part of the argument. But if all the four previous things are equal, then I do ask myself which one resonates or corresponds the most with general intuitions. In particular, the intuitions I expect my judge to have. So there are a judge is supposed to judge the debate from the perspective of a neutral, average informed global citizen who doesn't have any pre-existing views. But in reality, that is not always true. Now, it is perfectly legitimate to run an argument that is totally going to blow your judge's mind and change the way they view the world if it is reasonably easy to prove and there are other reasons to do it. But there is a risk involved. So sometimes, if you are going to run an argument that starts with a line that is highly against what people would intuitively believe to be true, such as actually, it is more empowering for women to stay at home and take care of the family. And maybe you have a really clever, interesting idea, which in this particular instance, in this context, is actually true. But there are judges who will just stop listening when when the argument begins with something that is not in accordance with their intuitions or the intuitions they believe that most people have. So if you have come to the point where you're literally choosing between two arguments, and those two arguments cannot be differentiated between either of the four previous questions, but they can be differentiated by one being more intuitive than the other, then go for that because that might give you a little bit of extra help with that argument. Now, if you've asked all these five questions and your arguments still seem to be equal, feel free to toss a coin because you probably have two very good arguments and they're probably going to win either way. We're going to move on to the last section, which is how do you win from extension? Before that, are there any questions? So, final part, how do you win? So there are two things I want to talk about here. One is how you communicate your extension in a way that the judges are happy to credit. And secondly, how to work as a team when you are in closing. So the first one is about what things are important to bear in mind as you present your extension. And this is going to be somewhat similar to the previous ideas. There are a couple of pointers to bear in mind. The first thing I like to talk about is the reframing. This is something that should nearly always happen in the beginning of an extension speech. It is where you say, the debate has so far been about this thing, now it's going to be about this thing, and here is an argument for why it should be about this thing. So, for instance, opening half might have been about principles. We're going to talk about the actual consequences of this. Now, the way this often comes out is more or less exactly as I said it, which is You say what the debate has been about. You might see a problem with that. You might then say, and then you say, we're going to talk about this. Sometimes you give a one-line assertion for why your stuff is important, such as practical. This is going to be about practical impacts because there are real people on the ground. Won't someone think about the children? So here is where the part in preparation where you compared the strength of the argument and you gave reasons for each of the arguments beat each other is so important. Because it's very easy to think about arguments as something that requires reasons. Like your substantive points have reasons and they're argumentative and they have different layers and so on. But your framing is something you just have to say. Instead, framing requires just as much argumentation as any other thing. So when you reframe the debate and you say, whatever top half has spoken about is not relevant, here's what is relevant, give a full argument for why that is relevant. So say something like, they have spoken about principles. Now, bear in mind that principles are only important when there are people who lose out on either side. When you have scarce resources, when you have harm to both sides, we use principles to decide how to distribute those harms. We are going to show that there are actually only harms on one side. We are going to show that there are harms that are so disproportionate on our side that their principle does not apply because it doesn't consider such a big harm. So you're giving a reason for why, if you've given your arguments, it is so much more important. Or if you say, top half so far have only spoken about men in this debate, because they have ignored that when we're talking about, I don't know, development aid, the most important stakeholder are women. First of all, why are women so important? Here are structural reasons for why anything that happens in a developing country affects women much more. Then you give your argument about why women are specifically affected in this debate, or how it interacts with women. But giving an actual justification that has an argument in it that says not only you should care about this more, but why you should care about our material more is incredibly important. Anything you say after that carries much further because you've already brought the judges to your perspective. They care about what you are about to say. The second thing to bear in mind in the structure of your extension speech is to be very clear about how your argument compares to the argument in the other side. So when you've given your reframing, you've definitely done your rebuttal against your own opening team, as in you've said why your material is more important. It probably also includes a bit of an attack against the team that is on your diagonal. So if you're closing government, you're opening opposition team, because they will probably have attacked your opening government team a lot. You're now saying that their attacks are less relevant, and if they have arguments that clash directly with it, let's say they have arguments about the same stakeholders, then they become less relevant. But there might be points left. Now, it's probably very wise to do explicit rebuttal against this. But in your notes for extension, you must also write down at some point where your argument beats their arguments. So they might have, let's say the motion is the voting motion again about minorities. They might have one, there's going to be backlash, and two, minority groups are going to opt out of other forms of democratic representation, like demonstrations, the media, those kind of things. So if those are the two arguments, and now you're running as your core material that the benefit of this is going to be actual life-changing policies for these communities, then you want to make sure at some point you do a direct comparison. Why are these policies more important for these communities than any harm that backlash can create? So you explain that even if we have both of these, here is how they compare. You might have done rebuttals saying that backlash will not happen. But if it happens, you need to have part of your argument showing why it is less important for that group. And then if you have the second, that they will opt out of other forms of democratic engagement, you might have given lots of reasons for why they won't. Why actually, when your vote matters, you might also care more about how other people in your group vote. So you do lots of that stuff. But even if that happens, maybe you want to give a reason for why democratic participation is less important if you already get the right policies. So maybe democracy is only insofar as it brings good policies. Your team has shown that we have good policies, therefore it matters more. So you want to make sure that you have that direct comparison. So how do you then approach this as a team? So I think the most important thing to do in a closing team is to be aware exactly of what the other speaker needs to do and try to do as much of that as well in your speech. So the extension speaker brings new material. The summary speaker does not bring any new material, but instead summarizes and shows why your team has won. How does this usually happen? Well, the extension speaker usually adds a detailed explanation of an argument in a persuasive way. The summary speaker usually talks about clashes. Here are the main areas in which we have had disagreements. Why do we win each of those clashes? However, if you in extension can already think about what are these clashes, to structure your argument around those clashes, you're already doing a lot of important work for your summary speaker. So when the summary speaker starts, it will sound similar. It means that now the judges understand where everything fits. So this is similar to the idea of comparing everything to what comes from your opposing opening team. If you make sure that you have indicated where your argument beats different parts of the debate, it is easier for your whip speaker to do that. And for the whip speaker, similarly, bearing in mind the extension and making the extension central to the speech, nearly as though the extension was given for the first time, is really important. Your primary job is to do the clashes. Your primary job is to make sure that you've beaten everything. But you should be using the extension as your tool to beat everything. So your job should be to say, here's our extension material. These really good policies. These policies beat backlash. These policies beat less engagement. These policies beat harms to the democratic system. These policies beat whatever other things, either because they're more important or because they can the argument cannot exist at the same time as an opposition argument, and your argument is more likely. So if the opposition argument is there will be worse policy and your argument there is better policy, then you're beating it because it is the same argument, but you have proven it better. Whereas if the argument is there's going to be backlash, then that is a different argument. You beat that by showing that your argument is the most important. But it is only as a second resort that you want to do other kinds of rebuttal. So instead of having reasons just for why backlash won't happen, that might just be a reason for why your opening team beats the team you're trying to rebut. You're just doing harm to them. You're not doing good things for yourself. If you take your extension and show why that extension beats that material, that's when you're putting your team ahead. That's when you win from extension. That's when you're able to do the core things. One, have an argument that wins more. Two, show that that argument is more important. And three, show that it can be compared with everything that happens in debate. And when those three things have happened, then you're winning from extension. Are there any questions? So I don't see any questions, and I think that the stream has now caught up with the chat. So in that case, with that said, it's been really nice to have an opportunity to talk to you. But in particular, I hope to see all of you at some debating event in the future. The very best of luck to all of you in the tournament, and have a very great day.